I can see exactly what's going through your mind right now. You watched those videos back in January and probably told yourself you'd take action soon. Then February slipped by, then March, then April, and suddenly it's already May. Now, there's that quiet doubt in the back of your mind wondering if you've already missed your chance. You haven't. But here's the reality you need to understand. The families who make their move this week are the ones who won't really feel what's coming later on. Meanwhile, the ones who keep postponing it for just another month are going to notice every single effect when things shift. One food economist put it in a way that really stuck with me. He explained that the fuse was already lit in February, and that the damage to harvests is already set in motion and can't be undone. According to him, the prices we're seeing right now are basically the lowest they're going to be for quite a long time. So today, I'm going to walk you through 10 foods that are still on shelves, still reasonably priced, and still absolutely worth picking up while you can. And the sixth item on the list honestly caught me off guard. It's something almost every household buys every single week, yet almost no one ever thinks about storing it ahead of time. Let's dive into it. Item 1 is corn-based products. Let me bring you back to a simple Tuesday night dinner at my place. Nothing complicated, just tacos, maybe some homemade cornbread on the side. It was the kind of easy meal you can pull together in about half an hour and still have everyone at the table genuinely happy. My kids never had a single complaint on Taco Tuesday, and my wife never really had to think twice about picking up a bag of mesa at the store. It was just something we always had. Consistent, affordable, and dependable. Then last week, I picked up the exact same bag, same brand, same store, and noticed it was $2 more than the last time I bought it. I remember standing there for a moment, still putting it in the cart anyway, but thinking to myself, how many people are seeing this price and quietly deciding to put it back on the shelf? Because here's the thing about corn that most people don't really consider. It doesn't feel like something that could become scarce or expensive. It's so deeply embedded in everyday food culture that it almost feels invisible, like air. It shows up everywhere. Tortillas, chips, cornbread, grits, and even corn syrup hidden in a huge portion of packaged foods sitting in your pantry right now. So when something disrupts corn, the impact doesn't stay isolated. It spreads everywhere. And right now, there are real pressures building in the system. For example, reducing nitrogen fertilizer use by just 10 to 15%, which is already happening for many farmers across the U.S., can cut corn yields by as much as 10 to 25% in a single growing season. That's a huge drop for a crop that doesn't just feed people, but also supports nearly all livestock production in the country. And here's the part most people completely miss. When they hear corn shortage, they imagine empty cans of sweet corn on grocery shelves. But that's not where the real impact shows up. The real pressure appears in everyday items. Tortillas becoming more expensive, chips shrinking in size, cornmeal creeping up in price by a couple of dollars, and grits slowly turning into something that feels oddly premium. Even processed foods containing cornstarch or corn syrup start rising in price quietly without any obvious explanation. It spreads through the entire system, almost unnoticed, until one day you're standing in a store doing mental math you never had to think about before. So here's the practical step. About 20 pounds of cornmeal, properly sealed in a Mylar bag with an oxygen absorber, can last up to 5 years. That's 5 years of cornbread, 5 years of simple family meals like tacos, and 5 years of not worrying about small price changes because you already locked in today's cost. If you're going to act on anything this week, this is one to consider. But if corn is just number one on the list, the next item is even more intense. It's tied to a 56-year historical pattern, and once you understand it, you'll see why this summer is shaping up to be unusually important. Item 2 is wheat flour. I want you to pause for a moment and really think about something. Think of every loaf of bread you've ever baked, every pancake breakfast on a slow Sunday morning, every time pizza dough was stretched across a floured counter, every birthday cake, every biscuit coming out of the oven still warm. All of those moments across all those different meals, they all begin with one simple ingredient: wheat flour. It's so deeply embedded in everyday cooking in the United States that most people never even stop to consider it as something that could become limited or expensive. It's just always there on the shelf, reliable, inexpensive, and easy to find. But what's happening with wheat right now is worth paying attention to. And this number really needs to sink in, because I had to read it more than once before it fully registered. Reports show that this year has the lowest planting level of spring wheat since 1970. That's 56 years ago, before most people watching this were even born. We are talking about a level of planting we haven't seen in over half a century, and it's happening right now, this very season. The reason comes down to inputs. Wheat is a fertilizer-intensive crop, and with fertilizer costs where they are, farmers are being forced into difficult decisions. In many cases, that means planting less wheat and shifting toward crops that require fewer resources just to stay viable. And here's the part that catches people off guard every time. The price of flour you see in stores today doesn't reflect any of this. It's still based on last year's harvest. The reality of this planting season hasn't reached the shelves yet. But it will. It always does. It just takes time for those changes to move through the system. And by the time most households notice flour getting more expensive, it's often already 30 to 40% higher. That's simply how supply chains work. There's no warning sign in the aisle. One week the price shifts, and then it just keeps moving. That's why people who pay attention early tend to buy before the harvest data fully hits the market, not after. So here's the practical step. A 25-pound bag of all-purpose flour, properly sealed in a mylar bag with oxygen absorbers, can last up to 5 years. That's 5 years of weekend pancakes, 5 years of homemade bread, and 5 years of not worrying about short-term price swings because you already secured it at today's cost. A simple rule some people follow is 1 bag per adult in the household, purchased ahead of time rather than later. If you act on anything this week, this is one of those basics worth locking in. But if flour and corn already make sense on this list, the next item is different. Most people walk past it every single week without ever thinking twice about storing it. And when you hear what's currently happening to all types of cooking oil at the same time, you'll understand why that aisle suddenly deserves a lot more attention. Item 3 is cooking oil. A neighbor of mine called me last week. She's not into prepping, she doesn't follow channels like this, and she's really just a regular mom trying to stretch a household budget that seems to get tighter every month. She sounded frustrated, and honestly a bit embarrassed, when she told me what happened at the store. She went to pick up her usual large bottle of olive oil, the same one she's been buying from the same shop for about 6 years, and she just froze when she saw the price. In the end, she grabbed a smaller bottle instead, put the bigger one back on the shelf, and told herself she'd just try to use less of it. What I didn't say out loud is that using less is exactly the reaction stores and suppliers are already counting on. Because most people don't really see what's happening with cooking oil as a whole. It's not just one product going up in price, it's all of them moving at once. Olive oil, vegetable oil, canola, sunflower, coconut oil. Every major type is under pressure right now for overlapping reasons. Part of it starts with rising production costs. Farmers are already dealing with higher fertilizer and input expenses, and then on top of that, transportation has become significantly more expensive. Fuel costs push up the price of moving goods from farms to processing facilities, and then again to store shelves. So the impact stacks up twice. Production gets more expensive, shipping gets more expensive, and the end result is what people notice in the aisle. Smaller bottles, higher prices, and less product for more money. But there's another angle most people don't think about. Cooking oil isn't just a kitchen ingredient. In a more disrupted situation, it's concentrated calories, dense, reliable energy when other foods become limited. It also plays a role in food preservation and cooking methods that stretch meals further and improve taste and texture. And historically, oil even had practical uses beyond food. Older generations used oils for lighting in lamps, treating it as a stored household resource the same way people today might store batteries or fuel. Not out of fear, but because it was useful and worth having on hand. What makes this interesting is how quickly small decisions add up. My neighbor chose the smaller bottle to save a few dollars in the moment, but if she had picked up a couple of extra large bottles earlier, she would have effectively locked in the lower price for months of usage. That short-term saving can easily turn into higher costs later on. And that same pattern quietly repeats across almost every aisle in the grocery store. So here's a simple approach. Pick a few extra bottles of the cooking oil you already use. Prefer darker bottles over clear ones when possible, since light exposure breaks oil down faster and shortens its shelf life. Store them in a cool, dark place away from heat sources like the stove. Coconut oil, when sealed properly, can last up to 2 years. Vegetable and canola oils typically last around a year, while olive oil can stay good for up to 18 months if unopened. The idea isn't to overcomplicate it. Just buy what you actually use, store a bit ahead, and rotate it naturally over time. But as important as cooking oil is, it really sets the stage for the next item. Because number 4 moves from fats and basics into something much more personal: protein. And what's currently happening with beef prices is something most American families have never really experienced at this scale before. Item 4 is canned protein. Let me ask you something a bit personal. When was the last time you added ground beef to your cart without pausing for a second to do mental math? Without standing there at the meat counter weighing the price in your head and wondering whether it still fits the budget this week, or whether it's better to skip it entirely? For many families right now, that small moment of hesitation has become almost routine. And what's interesting is that a lot of people feel a quiet sense of embarrassment about it, like it says something about them personally. As if struggling with that decision is some kind of failure. But it isn't a personal failure. It's a reflection of a system where prices are changing faster than household budgets can comfortably absorb. Here's what the data is actually showing. Beef and veal. Prices were already about 12.1% higher in March 2026 compared to March 2025, and they're projected to rise another 6.3% over the rest of this year. And that comes on top of an estimated 72% increase since 2020. So if you find yourself hesitating at the meat section, that reaction is actually logical. The cost really has climbed that much, and there's no quick reset button for it. The reason is structural. The cattle herd that supplies beef takes years to rebuild, not months. On top of that, disruptions like restrictions on cattle imports from Mexico continue to affect supply flow. In other words, the underlying math doesn't improve quickly. Because of that, many households are quietly adjusting how they get protein instead of eliminating it altogether. Rather than relying only on fresh beef, they're shifting toward canned options like tuna, chicken, salmon, and sardines. These still provide solid protein, often at a much lower cost per serving, and they come with a shelf life of roughly 4 to 5 years when stored properly. For example, a 24-can case of tuna from warehouse stores like Costco or Sam's Club can cost about the same as just a couple of pounds of ground beef. The difference is that those cans represent 24 separate meals of protein that can still be perfectly usable years later. It's not really a downgrade, it's more of a practical shift in how the same nutrition is sourced and stored. Water-packed options tend to last longer, have lower sodium, and are generally better for long-term storage. Rotating stock every 6 months helps keep everything fresh and usable without waste. So the idea is simple. Maintain protein in the household, but make it more resilient and budget stable. But canned protein is only one part of the bigger picture. Because the 5th item on this list is a protein source that has sustained families through every kind of crisis in human history, and right now, it's still surprisingly inexpensive. The catch is, that window isn't guaranteed to stay open much longer. Item 5 is dried beans, including lentils and similar legumes. There's something about this category that genuinely humbles me every time I think about it. Dried beans quite literally helped build civilizations. Ancient Rome relied heavily on lentils as a staple food. On the American frontier, beans were a core part of survival. And if you look back at nearly every major food crisis over the last 1,000 years, the Great Depression, both world wars, and countless regional famines, beans were one of the few foods that consistently kept people fed and families intact around the table. Today, that same food still sits on shelves at an almost unbelievable price. You can pick up a pound of dried black beans for roughly $1.50. Just $1.50 for something that has historically carried entire societies through collapse and scarcity. And that 1 pound translates into about 6 servings of complete protein-rich meals. When you compare that to what you're paying for animal protein like beef right now, the difference becomes hard to ignore, and it's a gap that keeps widening as time goes on. Because when feed and input costs rise beyond a certain point, farmers are often forced into difficult decisions, including reducing herd sizes or even selling off breeding stock. And when that happens, the impact doesn't just disappear after a few months. It can ripple forward for years, tightening supply long after the initial pressure began. That's why beans aren't really a backup option. They've always been the foundation. They're the steady, dependable plan that has worked across centuries, and in many ways, they're still doing that same job today. And here's another part that surprises most people. Dried beans are one of the longest-lasting foods you can store. When kept properly in airtight conditions, they can remain usable for 25 to 30 years. That means you're not just buying food for the next few weeks or months, you're essentially locking in long-term food security. The key is simple storage and choosing what your household actually eats. Black beans, red lentils, pinto beans, chickpeas, whatever fits your meals. Store them in airtight glass containers or food-grade buckets with proper sealing lids. Some people even add a bay leaf, which naturally helps deter pantry insects that can damage dry goods over time. It's a small, low-cost trick, but surprisingly effective. A general guideline many use is about 20 pounds per person in the household. At today's prices, that can come out to around $30 total. $30 for what could effectively serve as decades of protein backup if stored correctly. From a purely practical standpoint, it's one of the highest value food investments you can make. But we're only halfway through the list. Because number 6 is where things get even more interesting. It's something almost everyone buys weekly without thinking twice about storing it. And according to government data, it's also been the single fastest rising grocery category this year. Item 6 is sugar and honey. Let me ask you something simple, and I want you to be honest with yourself for a second. When was the last time you actually looked at the price of sugar in your grocery store? Not just glanced at it on the way past, but really noticed it and compared it to what it used to cost maybe 6 months ago? Most people never do. Sugar is one of those things that just feels permanent. It's always there, always cheap, always part of the background of everyday life. You grab it the same way you grab salt or pepper, without any real thought that it could ever change. I checked it recently, and then I went home and looked at the broader data. And honestly, I'm glad I did, because it changed how I think about something as simple as a pantry shelf. Right now, sugar and sweeteners are projected to rise about 6.7% in 2026, and they're already roughly 5.7% higher than they were in January 2025. According to the OTAA tracking data, that makes it the largest price increase across all grocery categories this year. The biggest increase of everything they track, sugar, and almost nobody is talking about it. No headlines, no rush to stock up, just a slow, steady climb that most households won't really notice until they're standing in the aisle and the price finally makes them pause. But what really changed my perspective is what sugar actually represents beyond taste. Sugar is also a preservation tool. If you've ever canned fruit or made jam, you already know this. Sugar isn't optional. It's part of the structure that makes traditional preservation possible. It's what allows homemade jams, jellies, and preserved fruits to actually work. Without it, a lot of those older home methods simply don't function the same way. And then there's honey, which is in a category of its own. Archaeologists have discovered edible honey in ancient Egyptian tombs that is over 3,000 years old. Still preserved, still sweet, still usable. It's one of the closest things we have to a naturally immortal food, something that essentially doesn't spoil under the right conditions. So when you think about storage, the logic is pretty straightforward. A 25-pound bag of white sugar, kept dry and sealed in an airtight container, doesn't really expire in any meaningful sense. It just stays usable indefinitely. It doesn't go bad, it just waits. And a few jars of raw, unprocessed honey add another layer of long-lasting sweetness that can sit in storage for years, often far beyond what most people expect. Together, they can be stored for under $40 and give you a long-term supply of baking, preserving, and sweetening that's locked in at today's prices. But the next item is different. Number 7 isn't just about prices going up. It's about a record being broken, one that stretches further back in time than most people alive today. Item 7 is white rice. There's a reason rice shows up in the kitchens of grandmothers across nearly every culture and every continent. And it's not by accident. They didn't keep just a small amount either. They kept a lot, more than they thought they might need. It was stored carefully, used gradually, and always present in the background like a quiet guarantee that no matter what was happening outside, there would still be food inside the home. They understood something that many people today have gradually stopped thinking about. We now live in a system where food is available at the store almost constantly. New shipments every couple of days, shelves restocked every 48 to 72 hours. Because of that, most people no longer think in terms of weeks or months. They think in days. And somewhere along the way, storing food started to feel unnecessary, even excessive, something only overly cautious people did. But rice changes that mindset completely. It forces you to think in longer time frames again. And in situations like this, that shift in thinking can make a real difference for families trying to stay prepared. Right now, global rice supply is still under pressure heading into the summer season. India's export restrictions, which played a major role in pushing prices higher last year, are still in effect. At the same time, fertilizer shortages are affecting grain production in multiple major growing regions at once. That combination keeps pressure on rice markets from multiple directions. But the most important factor isn't even the price. It's the shelf life. White rice, when stored properly in a food-grade bucket with a gamma seal lid and oxygen absorbers, can last up to 30 years. That's 3 decades of storage potential. In practical terms, the rice you buy this week could realistically outlast your mortgage. It could still be there for your children. It can sit in your pantry through multiple economic cycles, price spikes, and supply disruptions, and still remain safe to eat decades later. A basic setup is straightforward: a 50-pound bag of rice, a food-grade bucket, a sealed lid system, and a simple natural deterrent like bay leaves to help discourage pests. That's it. A one-time setup that can quietly support decades of food stability. And rice also connects directly with most of the other items on this list. But number 8 is tied specifically to something that's about to become significantly more expensive this fall. The timing here really matters, and once you see the connection, it becomes clear why even a short delay can start to cost real money. Item 8 is pasta. For a lot of American households, Sunday night has a rhythm to it, and pasta is often right at the center of that routine. A pot of water comes to a boil on the stove, sauce gently simmers on the back burner, and that familiar smell slowly fills the entire home. Kids somehow appear in the kitchen without even being called, just because they already recognize what's coming. It's one of those meals that creates a certain feeling, like everything is under control. The week ahead doesn't feel overwhelming, and home is exactly where it should be. That sense of comfort is something worth holding on to. And right now, it's also something you can still secure for very little money, often under $20 if you buy in bulk. The important thing to understand is that pasta is made from wheat, and we've already covered what's happening there. We're looking at the lowest wheat planting levels since 1970, combined with ongoing fertilizer constraints that are forcing farmers to reduce inputs and adjust production strategies. On top of that, drought conditions across large parts of the country are stressing crops that were expected to support this year's supply. The pasta currently sitting on store shelves is still priced based on last year's wheat harvest. But that delay between farm conditions and retail pricing always closes eventually. It moves slowly, from field to processing, from factory to distribution, and finally onto shelves and into shopping carts. And by the time it fully reflects the current harvest, the price has usually already adjusted upward. That's why by the time we reach later in the year, especially around September, it's very likely that the same box of pasta will cost noticeably more than it does today. But pasta also has one major advantage as a pantry staple. Dry pasta stored properly in an airtight container can remain usable for up to 2 years beyond its printed expiration date. That means every box you pick up now effectively locks in today's pricing for multiple years of everyday meals. It's not framed as emergency food in most homes. It's just regular food with a long shelf life, which is actually what makes it such a practical item to store. It fits naturally into normal eating habits and gets rotated without feeling forced or unusual. A simple approach is about 10 pounds total, mixing different shapes like spaghetti, penne, and rotini. So meals feel varied even when you're relying on the same staple. Storing it in vacuum-sealed jars or airtight containers can extend its quality even further, and the cost is still low enough that many households can build a buffer for under $15 to $20. It's one of those quiet, practical safeguards that doesn't feel dramatic, but does make a difference over time. And we're almost at the end of the list. Number 9 is something most people completely overlook in conversations like this. But when you see what the data is showing about this category and how supply is shifting behind the scenes, it becomes clear why many people are starting to add it to their carts without much hesitation. Item 9 is coffee and tea. Let me ask you something a little personal. What's the first thing you reach for in the morning before you check your phone, before you talk to anyone, before the day fully starts and the noise of everything else kicks in? For most people, it's coffee or tea, that quiet first ritual, the small moment of calm before everything speeds up, the thing that helps you feel like the day is actually manageable before it even begins. That's not just a habit. It's part of your routine, your mental reset, the signal that tells your brain, okay, we can do this. And right now, that daily comfort is slowly becoming more expensive month after month. Non-alcoholic beverages are projected to rise around 5.2% in 2026, placing them among the higher increase categories in grocery spending. Coffee in particular is being pressured from multiple sides at once. Weather and climate disruptions in Brazil, responsible for roughly 40% of global coffee production, are affecting yields. At the same time, shipping and logistics costs remain elevated. And when companies face those rising costs, they typically respond in ways most shoppers barely notice at first. Prices stay the same, but package sizes quietly shrink. So you may already be paying more without fully realizing it yet. But there's something about coffee that most people don't know, and it actually changes how you can store it. If you take coffee beans and freeze them in small, weekly portions, sealed tightly in vacuum bags, they can maintain their flavor and aroma for up to 2 years with very little quality loss. The key is portioning them ahead of time so you only take out what you need. When done correctly, you simply remove a portion, let it return to room temperature before grinding, and it tastes almost identical to fresh coffee. In other words, you can effectively lock in today's price and preserve the experience for years. Most people dismiss the idea because freezing coffee feels unusual, but in reality, it's one of the most effective ways to protect both quality and cost. A simple setup is just a couple of extra bags of your usual coffee. Divide them into weekly portions, vacuum seal each one, and freeze. Once thawed, you don't refreeze. It just becomes part of your weekly rotation. That alone can give you years of your morning ritual secured at today's cost. And finally, number 10. I know I said that about number 6, but this time I really mean it. Number 10 isn't flashy, and it's not something people usually make content about. But it may end up being the single most important item on this entire list. And the truth is, most people aren't thinking about it at all. Item 10 is salt and multivitamins. I want to end this list with something intentionally boring. Not exciting. Not flashy. Not the kind of thing that gets a dramatic thumbnail or a viral headline. Just plain, everyday salt and basic vitamins. But over time, I've noticed something pretty consistent. The boring items are often the most important ones. The things nobody pays attention to are usually the ones people end up needing the most. Let's start with salt. Most people don't really think about what salt actually represents. It's treated like a simple seasoning, something you sprinkle without much thought. But at its core, salt is one of the oldest preservation tools in human history. Every traditional method of preserving food, curing, pickling, fermentation, and long-term storage techniques passed down through generations relies on salt in some form. Without it, many of those methods don't function properly. And without those preservation methods, fresh food simply doesn't last as long. That creates a weak point in any long-term food plan. If you can't preserve variety, you lose stability in what you eat over time. At the same time, there are broader pressures on food systems. Some agricultural leaders have warned that fertilizer shortages could lead to tighter supply and higher prices. And with a large percentage of farmers already struggling to afford full fertilizer application, crop yields can be affected. When yields shrink, the variety of available foods often shrinks with them. And when your diet becomes less varied, your body can start missing key nutrients. That's where multivitamins come in, not as something dramatic, but as a simple backup layer. A basic set of vitamins stored properly in a sealed container with a moisture absorber can maintain usefulness well beyond its printed date. Common combinations like vitamin D3 with K2, vitamin C with zinc, and a basic B complex help cover the kinds of nutritional gaps that can appear when food variety is limited for long periods. A 6-month supply typically costs under $25. It sits quietly in a pantry without any attention until the moment it actually matters. And salt is even simpler. A 10-pound bag of pure salt usually costs under $8 and, when kept dry, essentially lasts indefinitely. Multivitamins for a similar time frame come in at around $25. Together, that's roughly $33 for two of the most overlooked but fundamentally practical items you can store. The key is proper storage. Salt should be kept in an airtight container, away from moisture. Vitamins are best stored in a sealed jar with a silica packet in a cool, dark place to help preserve potency. It's not exciting, it's not dramatic, but it is practical, and that's the entire point. To close this out, the core idea is simple. Corn, flour, cooking oil, canned protein, beans, sugar and honey, rice, pasta, coffee, salt, and vitamins. 10 basic categories. Most still affordable. Most still easy to find. But all moving in a direction where waiting too long starts to matter. The guiding principle is straightforward. Buy what you eat what you store, and rotate everything you keep. A pantry isn't meant to be a bunker. It's a living system that supports everyday life. If you had to start with just one item from the list, what would it be? And next time, I'm going to walk through 5 different stores and break down which ones are actually worth relying on for stockpiling in 2026. The top pick might not be the store you expect.